Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. Today I'm sharing my cards using Love From Lizi May 2020 card kit. This kit has already sold out, but there are some add-ons available along with the bumper pack, which has similar pattern papers along with a ton of die cut pieces. I will provide a link in the description box if you want to check out any of the add-ons that are still available. The only way to guarantee receiving a kit is to subscribe. So let's go ahead and get started with card number 1. I'm using a card sketch from MFT. This is number 486. I selected 2 different pattern papers and I'm just layering this on some cardstock. The kit does include some cardstock, but since I use so many layers on my cards, I do bring in some additional cardstock. I cut out this scallop square frame, and then I just trimmed off the bottom portion so I could adhere this to the card since I'm following this sketch fairly closely. And then I cut out this stitched scallop border die cut using the same cardstock as my matted layer. Just put some liquid adhesive on the back side to attach this, and this covers up that little gap between the 2 pattern papers. And then just to add a little extra shine, I'm using one of Love From Lizi's teal mirror peel-offs. I just put one right on the top edge of that scallop border. So let's go ahead and put my card front onto a card base. And then I'm using the sentiment dies that are included in the kit. I cut these out of that background layer. So you probably saw that earlier in the video. And this is Someone Special. But I think you could do it the other way around. You could do Special Someone. I'm just going to attach those inside this square frame. Just going to use some liquid adhesive. And since they are fairly small, I'm using my tweezers to hold those in place while I put the glue on the back. Once I have the 2 words down, the hardest part is adhering this tiny dot for the eye. So I did use my embellishment wand. It was easier to pick up that tiny piece. And then just to finish off the card, I'm adding 2 of the resin roses in that upper left-hand corner, and then a few of the sequins in the lower right-hand corner. There are 3 different colors of sequins in different sizes, so I'm just trying to figure out what ones I want to add to my card. And I set it on the smaller pieces. I'm going to use my embellishment wand. It just makes it so much easier to pick up those tiny pieces. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 1. So now moving on to card number 2, I'm not going to use a card sketch this time. I'm using some gold pearlescent paper that I dry embossed with this fun lattice background. And now I'm going to use some of the decoupage that's included in the kit. It's a little mini set. They have numbers on them, so you could layer these quite a bit. This one has up to 6 layers, but I decided just to do 3 layers, and I chose the odd numbers. So I have number 1, number 3, and number 5. That way I can use the other set for another card. So I'm going to pop up this background piece using some foam dimensional tape. And then once that's adhered, I can start building up the other layers. So now I have number 3, so let's put some more foam dimensional tape on the back side. And then after I get that in place, then I can do the final piece. So this does add quite a bit of dimension to a card. This wouldn't be something that you could mail easily without paying extra postage, but it does add some lovely detail. And I really like this embossed look on the pearlescent paper. And that pearlescent paper is one of the add-ons. I always pick up the specialty paper. They're so beautiful, and they do tend to sell out fairly quickly. So I'm just removing the last of the backing for the foam tape, and I'll just attach this to my card so you can see that extra dimension. I'll put my card front onto a card base. And now just for some finishing touches, I'm using 3 of the satin flowers that are included in the kit. They're this really lovely champagne color, and even though they blend in a bit on this gold background, I think they look really pretty. So I'm just going to put 3 of them underneath the sentiment image. So I am putting a small glue dot on the back and then also a drop of liquid adhesive. I just want to make sure they're not going to pop off later. And then I'm going to add just a small little banner in that upper corner using this blue cardstock. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 2. So now moving on to card number 3. This sketch is from Mojo Monday. This is number 529. And this sketch was designed as a narrow, kind of a skinny card, but I decided to still make a regular A2 size card. The only measurement I changed was the background piece. I'm using this beautiful floral paper for that background. I pulled in some more of that gold pearlescent paper for that longer strip, and then some of the leftover peach tone-on-tone paper from the first card. I'm layering most of these pieces with some cardstock, and for this peach paper I put a scrap of cardstock on the right hand side since it's going to be going off of that pearlescent paper. I wanted to keep it all nice and even. And for the strip going across the card, I'm just using that same background cardstock. Again, putting that small piece of scrap cardstock on the ends where it's going off of that pearlescent paper. Then once I get all of those pieces attached, I'm going to put my panel onto the layered cardstock, and then I'll attach the card front onto a card base. And for this card, I do have just that 1/8 of an inch of the card base showing. Now for the image on the card, I'm using one of the cut-aparts. 2 of the pattern paper sheets have some cut-aparts. This is a 2x2, and I love these beautiful butterflies. So I am going to layer up this piece, still adding that scrap cardstock, and then I'm also going to use a few pieces of thin foam dimension. Just always trying to keep everything nice and even on the card. And then I'll go ahead and attach this image to my card. For the sentiment, I stamped out "For You." There are 4 different sentiment stamps that are included on the stamp set this month. And I just stamped this on some white cardstock, cut a little fishtail on the end, and I'm just going to tuck it underneath the end of the little butterfly panel. So just trying to make sure it's going to fit. They did put another piece of that scrap cardstock on the left-hand side of the panel, and then put a little bit of liquid adhesive where I pulled up the little butterfly part because I didn't want it to pull up later on, and the liquid adhesive will help it stay. Then just a finishing touch, I'm adding 3 of the teal sequins in that upper right hand corner. I think it ties in nicely with the butterfly image. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 3. So moving on to card number 4. This sketch is by Mojo Monday. This is number 526. And if you are interested in any of the sketches I use, I share all of that information on my coordinating blog post, and that link is listed in the description box below. For this card, I have another beautiful pattern background with flowers and butterflies. I just rounded the bottom 2 corners just to soften the look. And then I'm adding a couple of the peach peel-offs on, it's a soft peach, on the bottom of the card. So I have 2 different widths. I cut the peel-offs just a little bit longer than the width of a card, and then tuck the ends behind. That way they won't come off later on the card. And I used some of the green cardstock that's included in the kit for this smaller rectangle panel. And I did round just the one corner since you're not going to see that right-hand corner. I'm just using some other cardstock. It's another green that I just had a scrap of, and then a little bit of that gold pearlescent paper for these 2 banners. I'm just adding a small scrap of cardstock on the upper area where the top of the 2 banners are going to go, and then also a small piece on the end of the longer banner, just where it's going off of the edge of that lighter green cardstock. I'll just adhere both of these in place using some liquid adhesive, and then I'll adhere my card front onto a card base. I've already gone ahead and rounded the corners on that card base so that it all matches. And now for the image and sentiment on the card, I'm using one of the ephemera pieces that was included in the kit, and then I also cut out a scalloped circle die cut in that same cardstock for the layers. I'm going to pop this up using some foam dimensional tape. I am following this sketch fairly closely. I selected it based on this ephemera piece. I searched through my pile of sketches until I found one that would work nicely with this large circle. And then I chose the rest of the papers to go along with that sketch so that it would all work together. And now just to finish off the card, I added a couple of the sequins in that lower right hand corner. And then I'm using my Nuvo shimmer pen and adding it all over the butterfly. So now it'll have this really pretty glimmery look. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 4. Now moving on to card number 5, I'm using a sketch from OWH. This is number 171. There are 2 sheets of pattern paper that are included in the kit that have these full bouquet images. I'm going to show you how you can use those full images on a card. I took that full paper and cut it in half, so then it would be 3 inches tall, and then I trimmed that piece down by 1.5 inches. So this main image piece is 4.5 by 3 inches. So then I took that piece and cut it into 3 segments. So each of these little panels is 1.5 inches wide. So I'm just adhering these onto some cardstock and leaving about 1/8 of an inch between all of them. With the cardstock layer, I think it looks like a window. So it kind of has the frame going around it. I just attached that onto some peach cardstock. And I'm using a few of the teal mirror peel-offs, just putting 2 of them on the lower portion of the card, using 2 different widths. Trying to get them nice and straight. I do cut those just a little bit longer, tuck the ends behind, and then I'll layer this panel onto this same turquoise cardstock. And then attach this onto a card base. And I always use white cardstock for my card bases. This is 120-pound cover weight cardstock, so it's nice and sturdy. For the sentiment, I'm using one of the little die cuts that's included in the kit. I'll be using this in place of that circle element on the sketch. And I'm just cutting a really small fishtail on each of the ends. I can't go in very far because then I would be cutting into that sentiment. And then I'm just going to layer it on this turquoise cardstock. And I'll just trim that out, leaving a small border. And then I'm going to pop that up using some foam dimensional tape. And then for a finishing touch, I'm using some Nuvo crystal drops in the mustard gold color. I'm just going to put 2 of them in this upper right hand corner. Trying to decide if I wanted to add more, but I think that was sufficient. And then I thought I was done, but looking at the card, I decided to add one more thing. So I pulled out some of the sway peel-offs in this really pretty green color. And I'm just using the thinnest width and putting them around the sentiment. The sway peel-offs have this really lovely scallop design on them. So I have them scallop side out, so it's away from the sentiment. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 5. And then moving on to card number 6, I'm going to use the other half of that pattern paper. So this is what that panel looked like on the previous card until I trimmed it down. But this time I'm keeping it that 3 inches tall, and then it is 5.25 inches in length. So I did still trim it down just a little bit so it would fit onto a card base. For the bottom paper, I'm using some of that mint green pearlescent paper, and then I used the peel-offs from the kit and just put 1 strip between those 2 papers just to add a little extra sparkle and a little bit of division. For the sentiment on the card, I'm using another of the little punch outs. I'm going to pop this up using some thin foam squares. I'll just put this in the lower right hand corner. And then I used the butterfly die. It's this tiny little die that's included in the kit. I cut 3 of them out of some gold mirror paper. I always keep that specialty paper on hand, even the tiny scraps, because you can use it for something like a tiny butterfly. So I'm just putting 3 of them on the card. I have 2 of them up in that upper left hand corner and then 1 near the sentiment. And then I decided to add some sparkle to the flowers. So I have my Nuvo shimmer pen, and I'm just brushing it all along this beautiful bouquet. So there is my finished card. It's very simple, but it's a great way to use those large images that are on the pattern paper. So now moving on to card number 7. I'm using another Mojo Monday sketch. This is number 533. I have 3 different pattern papers. I love this background paper. It's a peach color and it has some pink flowers and green leaves. And then I'm also using this green leaf paper and then just that last scrap of that peach paper. Now for this green leaf paper, since I'm having a larger image box on my card, I needed to stretch out this paper. And since I'd already cut it out, I just decided to snip the bottom portion off. And I just separated those, adhered them down, and you're not going to see that little gap since that peach layer as well as the image box is going to cover it up. But since I didn't want to have that little dip from the lack of paper, I'm just putting some scrap cardstock underneath it. And then I'll do the same thing for that peach tone-on-tone strip going across the card, just putting that small strip of scrap cardstock on the ends. And then once I have those in place, I can adhere this panel onto my card. And then I just flip over that panel and trimmed off the extra. Sometimes I have it a little bit longer, easy to fix. And then next I pulled out some of the rose gold peel-offs. And I'm just putting one on the bottom edge of this peach panel, going just slightly inside that edge. And I could have used some smaller scraps since most of it's being covered up, but I wasn't really thinking about it while I was adhering those in place. So I'll just layer this panel on some cardstock and then add it to my card base, and then I can start working on the image. I'm using a piece of white cardstock and I'm going to ink the background using some Distress Oxide ink. This is the Tattered Rose color. So it's just going to have a very faint color. And it does match really nicely with the background paper on my card. I just didn't want this panel to be completely white. So now I'm going to stamp the image along with the sentiment. I'm using the add-on stamp set called Angels Without Wings. This is a special stamp set Lizzie released where all of the proceeds are going to be donated to her local hospital to help them purchase more PPEs. So there are lots of these darling little doctors and nurses, little healthcare workers. So I'm using 2 of the images, and there are male and female images, so that's really nice. Now since I don't color very often, I still wanted to find a way to use these images. So that's why I added a little bit of color to the background of the paper. And now I'm just going to stamp these out using some Lawn Fawn gray ink. I'm going to ink this up several times. That's why I'm using my Mini Misty. And these have a fun, sort of a sketchy look to them. If you do want to see these colored up really pretty, Alicia over at Crazy Paper Chick did a video featuring, I think, 8 of these little characters. So I highly suggest go check her video out. And the sentiment I used on this card is not all superheroes wear capes. I love all of the sentiments included on the stamp set. So after I layered this panel on that same turquoise cardstock, I'm just putting some foam dimensional tape in the areas where it's going over the other layers. Just trying to keep it all nice and even. So I think that peach background worked out really nicely with that pattern paper background. And now just a few finishing touches. I'm putting a couple of the sequins in the upper right hand corner. I'll just adhere those in place using some liquid adhesive. And then I decided to add some Nuvo glitter drops to the card just for a little extra sparkle. This is the Summer Sunrise color. I just put one on both sides of the sentiment and then also on the little nurse's hat and then the pocket on the doctor. So there is my finished card, and I really like how this one turned out. But do let me know which card is your favorite. So now moving on to card number 8. There are 2 sheets of handmade paper that have these petals embedded on them. And I do want to mention, if you have any petals that come off, you can easily just glue those back in place using some liquid adhesive. So I layered this on some burgundy cardstock, and then I'll also be putting it on some more of this gold pearlescent paper. And then I'm adding this scallop border die cut, just putting it on the lower portion, lower third of the card. And I might use some of the, I think these are the gold moon dust peel-offs. I'm not sure if that's the name of this one. Lizi sells so many different peel-offs. I don't always remember the exact name, but it's really pretty and it matches nicely with this gold pearlescent paper. So I just put that one peel-off on the top of that border die cut. So layered that on the pearlescent paper, attached that to my card base, and then I used the small scrap of this handmade paper and stamped out the thinking of you sentiment. So I just picked part of that handmade paper that didn't have any of the petals. And then I'm just going to pop this up using some foam dimensional tape. I'm just putting the tape on those outer two edges so that center is going over where the border die cut is. And since I didn't want it to dip down in the middle, I am going to put just a couple scraps of cardstock in the center and then some ATG. And then just a finishing touch, I'm adding the little ornate corner die cut that's included in the kit. I cut it out of that gold pearlescent paper. I'm just going to put it in that upper right hand corner. And then I also cut out a couple more of the butterflies using that same gold pearlescent paper. And I'm just going to glue both of them underneath, or kind of the bottom corner of the sentiment, just to balance out the card a little more. So there is my finished card, and this one was so much fun. I love these real petals in the paper. So now moving on to card number 9. I'm using the Nouveau shimmer powder that's included in the kit. This is the green parade color. I sprayed the paper just with some water, and now I'm sprinkling this Nouveau powder all over the paper. So you can see when it hits the water, it starts to spread. You can see the different colors mixing. So this is something you just kind of have to play with. You add a little more powder, you can add a little more water, and I'm just holding it down with the end of a paintbrush just because that paper will curl up. So there is what my panel looks like once it's all dry. It has this beautiful shimmer look to it. I trimmed it down so I can use it on my card, but first I'm going to work on the image. So I have a piece of acetate and I'm putting a ton of the anti-static powder on it. And then I'm using some Versamark ink. So I have one of the images with the leaves and a little bird, and I'm going to do some heat embossing on a piece of acetate. I'm using Love From Lizi's Golden Crown embossing powder, beautiful gold color. Just gonna sprinkle that onto the stamped image, wipe away any extra little powder pieces since I don't want them to heat emboss. So you can see how nicely that does attach to the acetate, and this heat sets really quickly. I feel like it's quicker than a paper. So there it is, all finished, and I will be attaching this onto the front of my card. But first I'm going to wipe away the powder since I don't want all that extra powder. And I cut out this stitched scallop rectangle die cut using some of the pearlescent paper. I'm just going to put some 1/8 of an inch score tape all around the outside, and this is going to be the frame for my image. Let's pull off the backing, and then I could place this image right on top. And then I do want to pop this up, so I'm going to put some foam dimensional tape on the back. And this could be really fun as a shaker card as well, but I decided I didn't want it as a shaker card. But before I finish up the image, I'm going to add a couple of the peel-offs to the bottom portion of my card front. And I'll be using one of the die cut punch outs. This is Birthday Wishes. I thought it matched really nicely with that background paper. The flowers are green on that image with the yellow centers. I'm just going to use some liquid adhesive to adhere this panel onto some gold satin paper. Since it was wet and it's a watercolor paper, it does warp up slightly. I used to use more score tape to adhere this kind of panel, but I switched over to the art glitter glue. It's a little less expensive and it holds really nicely. And I learned about this from Jen over at Scrap Bana Creations. It's always nice to learn other tips and tricks from fellow crafters. So for the sentiment, I did decide to layer this on some of that gold mirror paper. And then next I'll work on the dimension for the image. So I'm using just that same foam dimensional tape and just cut a very thin piece to go around that frame. This is probably a little less than 1/8 of an inch wide. Okay, cut one more piece out and get it all along the frame. And this doesn't have to be perfectly snug since I'm not using it as a shaker. I just wanted to pop it up from the background just to add that little bit of dimension. So once I remove that paper backing, I can attach this image to my card. I'm putting it fairly close to the top of the card so that I still have enough room to put the sentiment. And I am going to put some foam dimensional tape on the back of the sentiment as well. I'm just using the thinner dimensional tape. So just remove the backing and then adhere this underneath that image. And for those peel-offs, I only used those little tiny scraps since most of it wasn't going to be visible on the card. Once again, I pulled out that darling little butterfly die, cut out 3 of them using some of the gold mirror paper. Just trying to figure out where I wanted to put that last butterfly and just attach those using some liquid adhesive. And there is my finished card. Now moving on to card number 10, and this is my final card. I have another Mojo Monday sketch. This is number 513. I selected 2 different pattern papers. I have a tone-on-tone in this light green for the bottom of the card, and then a busier design for the upper portion. I'm using some of the ribbon that's included in the kit. It's this beautiful pink that has a glitter finish on it. I'm just going to put that between the 2 pattern papers. I just adhere it using some score tape. Wrap the ends around just like I do with the peel-offs, and then put some score tape on that back side just to make sure the end of the ribbon doesn't come loose. I'll put my card front onto a card base, and then I pulled out another one of the ephemera pieces included in the kit, and this matches really nicely with this pattern paper. So it has this pretty scallop border all around. I wanted to frame it a little more, add some sparkle. So I'm using some of the pink holographic peel-offs. This is the thinnest width, and I'm just putting it all along the inside edge of that pink frame. Just cutting it off with my knife. So it's very subtle, but it does add a pretty sparkle. And then I'll pop up this image using some foam dimensional tape. And I do like to use plenty of tape just to make sure I get good coverage on the back and there isn't one side that dips down. Now since this image is fairly similar to that background paper, I wanted to add a little bit of separation. So I'm adding a piece of vellum behind this image box. So it's not going to cover the entire back piece of the card, just part of it, kind of following this sketch with that smaller rectangle piece. Now since adhesive shows through on the vellum, I just want to put it in places where it's going to be covered up. So I put a little bit behind where that image box is, and then later I'm going to put a little bit more behind where this sentiment will be. So this is another one of the punch outs. This has thank you, and I just layered that in some pink cardstock. And I'll pop this up as well using some foam tape. And before I adhere that down, I'm just lifting up that vellum, putting some ATG. So now I know that vellum isn't going to come loose at all. And then just for some finishing touches, I'm going to add some of the sequins, and I'm only using the pink color this time. And I put one of them on that upper corner of vellum, just another way to hold it in place. So just putting some liquid adhesive down and then attaching the sequins using my embellishment wand. And then once I have all of the sequins in place, I'm going to add a little extra sparkle to the card. So I pulled out the Nuvo shimmer pen. I like to test it out on some cardstock first. And I'm just going to add it to the butterfly and also the little flowers around the sentiment. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 10. Now here's just a quick recap of the 10 cards I made using Love From Lizi's May 2020 card kit. Now this kit has already sold out. It sold out very quickly but there still are add-ons available, and I will have links provided in the description box if you are interested in checking those out or signing up to subscribe to her monthly kits. Now here's everything I have left over from the kit. I have 2 full sheets of cardstock and quite a bit of scrap cardstock, a full sheet of the handmade paper and another half, a bunch of the pattern paper scraps, and I think there are 8 more sheets of pattern paper. There are the peel-offs. I didn't even use one full because I used a bunch of others. I have 1 more sheet of the mini decoupage, half of the sheet of the other, lots of ribbon, still lots of the punch outs and a few pieces of the ephemera. I have 3 of the resin birds, 1 more of the flowers, the Nuvo shimmer powder, some of the sequins, and then of course the dies. And then I have 2 of the satin flowers and then also the stamp set. So still a lot left, or I could make plenty more cards. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.